Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Shack. And if you watched our episode on the Cambridge Z88, then you'll know that Sir Clive Sinclair's little laptop computer was a productivity powerhouse back in 1987. Although not entirely exceptional or groundbreaking in terms of the technology inside, being based as it was on an established Z80 architecture and a simple expansion bus for extra memory, program cartridges and communication options, it brought that technology to the user through an advanced task switching operating system, included some lovely applications and a full implementation of Acorn's BBC Basic. You'll also remember that the Z88 was not a Sinclair branded product. Sir Clive had sold the Sinclair brand to Alan Sugar's Amstrad in 1986. However, that sale didn't include the Z88, which was under development at one of Sinclair's other companies, Cambridge Computer Limited. It took Amstrad nearly 5 years to release their own assault on the Z88's target audience in 1992, and as we'll see, the machine they launched could politely be described as inspired by the Z88. If we were to be unkind, we'd say it was a blatant copy. And if the Z88 wasn't exactly cutting edge in terms of technology in 1987, what advances had Amstrad made in the 5 years since? Had they managed to out Z88 Sir Clive? Had Amstrad released something that had all of the best bits of Sinclair's machine and also improved on its weaknesses? Was this a genuine attempt to capture the market for lightweight closed application portables, or was this all just sour grapes and a big flip off from Mr. Sugar to Mr. Sinclair for not getting the Z88 in the first place as part of the Sinclair deal? Join us today as we take a look at this oddly charming and quirky little machine, the Amstrad NC100. Before we begin, I'd like to say a big thanks to the sponsor for this video, Fifine. As you know, I struggled a lot with audio in the early days of the channel and worked my way through a number of different microphones. This K690 was offered to me to try out. I guess they felt sorry for me. Well, now it sits permanently on the desk in the studio, and while it can't improve the meaning behind my nonsensical droning, it does at least mean you can finally hear me properly. All the details of this microphone are down in the description if you, like me, want to be heard clearly, if not taken at all seriously. Thanks Fifine. So, here's our NC100, kindly donated to the Shack by the lovely John Leonard, who sent this unit in to us complete with its original pleather case and manual. He'd already popped in a few batteries and given it a quick test. Thanks John, you go on to our donators' wall of fame. And before we go too much further, let's get one thing out of the way and talk about the elephant in the room. It's very similar to the Z88. It's exactly the same length and it's exactly the same width. It's thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom, but averages out at, yes, the same thickness as a Z88. The keyboard is the same size in relation to the rest of the unit, and even the layout of the cursor keys is the same. What is glaringly different is the addition of these very colourful function keys, which, to my mind at least, demote the machine immediately from the Z88 in respect of professionalism. Whilst the Z88 looks sleek and modern whilst you sat on the train, quietly tapping away on its little rubber keyboard, the NC100 shouts, "Look at me!" and anyone who did may be forgiven for passing this off as a learning aid for children. I mean, there are VTech machines from the early 90s that had more professional looking keyboards than this. So why did Amstrad make this machine? Let's take a look at the market for portables at the time and try to determine what Amstrad's game plan was. The early 90s were a difficult time for Amstrad, especially following their successes of the late 80s, where they had been incredibly successful with their PC 1512 system, which some report as having captured 25% of the European computer market, with its MS-DOS compatibility and GEM user desktop, and eventually Windows. The Sinclair brand had been performing well with Amstrad since their acquisition of the brand in 1986, with Amstrad recouping its entire £5 million purchase price by selling on the unsold stock alone. They went on to release further models of the ZX Spectrum, which also went on to commercial success, and along with Amstrad's own line of home computers, the CPC range, held a significant portion of the home computer market in several European countries. The CPC range alone sold over 3 million units and did particularly well in the UK and also in Germany through Amstrad's local partner Schneider. In 1988, Amstrad released the PPC 512 and the PPC 640, portable machines that included everything you needed for PC computing on the move. And also notably, these machines were released a year ahead of Apple's first battery-powered machines, the Macintosh Portable. So at the end of the 80s, Amstrad were well positioned in both the business PC market, home computers, and the emerging wave of portable computing. But by the early 90s, things had changed. Competition in the PC market and troubles with suppliers had caused Amstrad to lose its market share in Europe. The ill-fated GX4000 console had flopped spectacularly. Amstrad had no real answer to the Atari ST, Amiga and Macintosh computers that had ushered in the 16-bit domination, and every tech company in the world was chasing the portable and ultra-portable markets, including Apple's Newton, released in 1993, to which Amstrad responded with their PDA 600, or PenPad. Putting aside for a moment the Z88 from Cambridge Computers, another UK company had been causing a stir in the portable arena. Psion, once primarily a software house and a close partner of Sinclair Research, producing titles for the ZX81, Spectrum and QL machines, in 1984 Psion released the Psion Organizer, and 2 years later the Organizer 2. Interesting machines with a unique and rugged form factor, and which as a result had gained popularity in retail and industrial sectors. By 1993, the Psion Series 3 had been released, a small form factor clamshell ultra portable machine that Psion sold by the bucket load. And it was into this market that Lord Sugar wanted to launch a simple, powerful, expandable, connectable and easy to use ultra portable. But when you consider the competition at the time and the innovations coming from companies such as Psion, Apple, HP and IBM, all of whom had more powerful and feature-rich offerings, it's perhaps not difficult to see why this machine wasn't the amazing success that Amstrad had hoped for. Perhaps it was just 5 years too late. Let's take a more detailed look at the machine. On the top right of the machine is the power switch, which sits flush to the surface, so little danger of it accidentally turning on in your backpack or briefcase. On the left hand side there's a PCMCIA slot, which allows you to pop in up to an additional 1 MB of memory if you find the standard 64K isn't enough. The right hand side contains a wheel for the contrast of the LCD screen, and on the rear we have the 6V power input, and unlike the Z88, and at the time industry standard serial port and Centronics parallel port. So that means getting files on and off this thing and printing stuff out was considerably less reliant on OEM cables and software. The cables and printers you already had would likely have worked just fine. On the bottom we've got the battery backup compartment, giving you standby time of, well, actually quite a long time. There are reports of this thing lasting a year on a full CR2032 battery without losing the contents of its memory, so that's not bad. There's a slot here for where the AA batteries go. A fully charged set of these will give you 20 hours of use. There's this other little trapdoor which gives you access to the machine's ROM, presumably so that you can upgrade it if a newer version were available, although I don't think there ever was an official upgrade, so potentially this was also used for localization in other geographies. If anyone out there has one of these with a different ROM or more information on this, please let me know in the comments. Right, let's take a look inside. So as we take this machine apart, I'd like to draw attention to the one thing that personally I think really let this machine down. When comparing it to not only the Z88 but to other machines around at the time, and that's the fact that other than the PCMCIA memory slot, there really isn't any other way to expand this machine, including no ability to run third-party programs other than transfer them over via serial cable. And that's a real shame, as it meant that for most users you got what you bought and that was it. 5 years before this, the Z88 had ROM cartridge slots, so you could, and still can, buy third-party software that you just plug in and use. And by the time this NC100 hit the market, Psion and others all gave you access to a wide array of software. And ultimately, software sells the machine. Now, I feel I need to throw Amstrad a bone here because, like almost all of Amstrad's products, this machine was designed to be inexpensive. Okay, let's just say cheap. At only £199, at a time when laptops were costing well over £2,000, and the Scion Series 3 mentioned earlier was between £179 and £249, depending on the memory size. The Macintosh Portable cost nearly £4,500, so perspective. The NC100 has a Z80 processor running at a healthy 4 MHz. This was coupled with 64K of memory as standard, and of course expandable to 1 MB via that PCMCIA card slot. It also had a 80 column by 8 line display which was not backlit to preserve battery life, and what it did have over the Z88 was a quote proper keyboard. So while it was cheap, was it good value? Amstrad really went to town with the user-friendliness aspect of the machine. Alan Sugar called it his baby during development, and maintained throughout the design process that even he himself, a ironically non-computer user, should be able to fire it up and use it without the need to refer to a manual, which, incidentally, to prove his point, he wrote the first chapter of on one of these machines. Now, admirable as this is, it does lead to a rather simplified feel to the menus, and it's all a bit Fisher-Price, but usable, and it was what it was. If you brought one of these thinking you were getting a cheap laptop, you weren't. You were getting a word processor and a personal organiser with the ability to do a little bit of programming too. And there's not much more to it than that. It's a lovely little machine to own, although I don't think it will get a lot of daily use, as I do prefer the Z88. It's a cracking piece of early 90s tech that will proudly be displayed in the shack. Thanks again to John for donating this machine. It's been a pleasure to research, and I hope all of you have enjoyed the video. If so, please press the like button, and if you like the channel, please subscribe. Almost 70% of people watch regularly but don't subscribe, so if you're one of those folk, please do so, even if it's only for the next few weeks. Mrs. Retro Shack laughed when I said I might get 10k subs by my birthday in June, so let's show her. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can either hit the join button for details of membership, or you can just buy me a coffee if you'd like. There's a button on the banner, and it would be much appreciated. Right, until next time in the shack, it's goodbye from me.